Today we'll be talking about Chapter 4 and information relevant to the self. Some of the basic terms I would like you to be familiar with include self-concept, self-awareness, self-esteem, and self-presentation. We'll be covering these at different times throughout this lecture. This video will be a little longer than some of the videos we've had so far. There's quite a bit of material in this chapter to cover. Let's see, let's just dive right in. This is kind of a preview of some of the things that we'll be talking about. Self-awareness is something that we see actually happening in kids. They do a test for little kids, and they do it with animals too. They will put a bit of red makeup or face paint or something on a person's forehead and ask them to look in a mirror. If the person realizes, if the child or even animal realizes this is them, they'll often touch their own face, realizing there's a mark up there. That is a fairly good test for very young kids and also for animals, that they have self-awareness. I mean, you'll see I have the bonobos, orangutans up there, but you have other tests for different types of animals to realize they too have some degree of self-awareness. For humans, usually they'll recognize at the age of 18 months that the red dot that you put on their forehead is them. So that's the beginning of self-awareness. Around age 2, humans begin to become more self-aware of their ascribed gender. They start to describe themselves in terms of their own physical traits by the time they're 4, their own personality traits by the time they reach 6, and they really realize others are judging them the way that they judge other people by the time their age is like 5 to 7 years old. Let's see. So our self-concept, the degree to which our responses reflect our own socially recognized identities and the roles we take, our traits, our hobbies, our interests. Those are all parts of our self-concept. And sometimes that self-concept can be simple, but it's typically better if it's more complex. So if you look at the research on how we identify ourselves and we consider all these things at once, then if we take a hit in part of our self-concept in one area, we can bolster or focus on other parts of self-concept. So people who have very complex self-concepts, very different aspects of their identity are relevant to them, and they value that. They end up getting sick less often. They have fewer problems with illnesses. So if you think of yourself as a student, or you can also think more complexly, I'm a good student in psychology. I may be a weaker student in my Spanish class. That's something I wish I were better at. Do you think about yourself in terms of your appearance? So I'm middle-aged. If you think about the skills, I can play piano, I'm good at ping pong. I think about all the different things that all fold into, and you think of yourself as a son or daughter, boyfriend, girlfriend, all those different things play into our self-concept, and the more complex, the better. They usually also, you can even include personality traits. I like to think of myself as honest and transparent and clear. Those are important for me as a teacher and as a therapist and as a friend. I put up here, the greater self-complexity is correlated with all sorts of things: less stress, fewer illnesses, just easier to tolerate frustration. If you look at research on studying the self, and you ask people to memorize different lists of words, and you can ask and you give different groups of people lists of words, same list of words, and some of you ask, okay, try to remember these, whether they're in all caps or smaller letters. Others, does it rhyme with another word? Others, what does this word mean? But if you ask a person to read that same list of words and how each word relates to the self, and you give them these tasks, you take away all the words, and then you go back to each one of these groups and say, recall all the words on that list. They didn't know they were going to have to recall all the words on that list at the beginning of the study. People who are asked to relate the words to themselves remember a lot more of those words than people who were just asked to remember if the words were in all capital letters or not, or in any of the other conditions. So processing information in relation to self causes us to remember it more, and it has more meaning. That's important for studying for this class. If you can take everything we talk about and think about, how do I do that? How does this affect me? When I'm in a situation, how do I relate to others in this way? That will help you store that information and be able to use it in a way that's meaningful. Another area of research on the self includes the degree to which we are really paying attention to who we are. Sometimes we can be de-individuated. That means the idea of de-individuation means that we are not like hyper aware of just, this is me, I'm presenting myself in this situation and people know it's me. And a question in one set of research asked if you could do anything humanly possible with complete assurance that you would not be detected or held responsible, what would you do? The number one response across the globe was rob a bank. So when people are de-individuated, not held accountable for who they are, you get some funky responses. This also happens, though, de-individuation can happen in all sorts of situations when people are not feeling like I'm expressing me and people can recognize me. But that means all sorts of things. When people are in uniforms, so that can happen with police officers or people in an army battalion. That can happen to people just even in choir robes. That can happen in just if you work at McDonald's and you have a McDonald's work uniform on, you're less identified as yourself and more in the role. That causes people to act in less accountable ways, and that is an issue. Another set of research has been shown, if you want to make a person more self-aware and then they're more self-conscious, basically, they're going to act in ways that are more consistent with their own values. So if you one of the things that increases self-consciousness and self-awareness would be the presence of a mirror. Some people do things like this, like they'll put a mirror on their refrigerator or even a note. It's like, are you sure you're hungry right now? That increases self-awareness. It's like, okay, if they're on a diet, then they may think about that. If you put big mirrors in a classroom, there's been evidence to show that cheating on tests goes down. I think an interesting study was done on Halloween where they asked kids to take only one piece of candy. Now I can see my picture of myself is blocking the Halloween treat thing. If you put, say, just a sign up in front of a big bowl of candy that says take one piece only, and some of the kids get a mirror there and some don't, kids become a lot more aware when the mirror, and they go up to grab the piece of candy, it's like, oh, there's a mirror there, and they'll only take one piece. But if there's no mirror there, they're shoveling it in. They even extended that study to find that when they didn't just set out a bowl, but they had kids come inside a house and a person said, okay, I want you to take one piece of candy, but I have to go do something. Take one piece and let yourself out. If the kids were allowed to keep their masks on, they were more de-individuated, which is funny because right now we're all wearing masks. So it's, we're more de-individuated naturally because of coronavirus. If the person who answered the door asked them to take off their mask, they were more self-aware and they only took like one piece as they were asked. Groups affect this too when people are in large groups, and this was done with the Halloween study. When kids were in large groups and never asked to take off their mask, that's when they stole all the candy. If they were alone and took their mask off because the person who answered the door asked them to reveal themselves, they only took one piece of candy. So self-awareness and de-individuation are closely related to the degree to which we act in accordance with our own values and standards. There's a couple different things about whether we're high on private self-consciousness or public self-consciousness. People who are high on private self-consciousness, they look inwards to their feelings and their thoughts. That's an important thing. I have a couple items here from a scale trying to measure it. I'm always trying to figure myself out is one thing someone who's high on that would say. Someone who's high in public self-consciousness would say things like, I'm very concerned about what other people think about me. I care a lot about how I present myself to others. And this relates to self-presentation, which we're going to get here in just a minute. But you can imagine, given the research we talked about in terms of individualistic versus collective self-consciousness, that people who are from collectivist cultures are going to be much higher in public self-consciousness. They're going to be looking to ensure that the way they're presenting themselves is promoting harmony within the group. Whereas people from individualistic cultures aren't as concerned about that and probably are more likely to be higher in private self-consciousness. There's another area of research in terms, and this is all interrelated. So different concepts used by social psychologists start to tie different ideas related to the self within one another. They're interrelated. So people who are high self-monitors are consistently like checking out, how am I meeting the demands of this current social situation? People who, that means they're consciously monitoring themselves. And is this how I'm supposed to act when I'm at work? Is this how I'm supposed to act when I'm with meeting somebody's parents? Is this how I'm supposed to act when I'm in church? Is this supposed to be how, all those different things? Some people are, the people who are low self-monitors tend to be more consistent in their behaviors. High self-monitors are more chameleon-like and are able to shift their behaviors depending upon the demands of the situation. So people who are high self-monitors, I just came up with a whole list of studies I just ran through the literature on, and this is just interesting stuff. They have more social skills, they read others' nonverbal cues, they express their own nonverbal reactions better, they learn how to act in a new situation better, they start conversations, they use some of the techniques we're going to talk about in terms of promoting themselves. They tend to be in less committed relationships, and they judge other people by their physical appearances. So I'm not going to test you over all these things. These are just, but you can get a sense of what people who are high self-monitors, they're engaged in these sorts of behaviors. People who are highly self-aware but suddenly see themselves in a bad light, like if you fail a test. There's all sorts of things you can do. One of the things you can do is leave a situation, or you can say, oh, I'm not focused on it anymore, I want to change on this. I used to have a friend who, whenever we played video games, if he was doing poorly, he'd suddenly want to switch the games because he was seeing himself in a bad light and thinking that, like, oh, I should be good at all these games, but I know I'm not doing very well at this one right now, so let's play this other one. Sometimes people just distract themselves. They'll just eat, drink, smoke weed, sometimes exercise, just to distract themselves from any sort of negative self-evaluation. I know there are a lot of terms in this chapter related to the self, and they are all interrelated. We'll probably have a more cohesive discussion of these aspects in our classroom. So the video here I'm presenting, I'm trying to introduce a lot of terms related to the self. There's this idea, this illusion of transparency, that other people can see what's going on with us. Other people can't. So we tend to just totally overestimate the degree to which people can even tell that we're lying. Please read the study on this illusion of transparency that's discussed in your book. I won't go into the details now. I'm sure you've heard of self-esteem and what that involves. It's a sense of our own feeling about ourselves in terms of being a worthy and valuable person. I have some correlates here. That means that these two things are related, but keep in mind, these are not things that cause one to the other. They're interrelated. So the higher self-esteem a person has, it's related to, but does not necessarily cause the things I have here. Better grades, less depression, less stress, being happier, living longer lives. Actually, people with higher self-esteem are likely to bully more, but also likely to intervene and stop other people being bullied. They're more likely to speak in public, and they take more risks in terms of drugs and alcohol and sex. Let's see, self-esteem. You know what high self-esteem hopefully looks like. I hope you have it, because there are all those correlates that go along with it. People with low self-esteem are usually guilty and eager to please. They're self-critical. They think things like, I'm average, I want good things, so I'm scared if I'll fail if I try. And they prefer to avoid harm and self-protection more than anything else. Move on. Self-presentation. So this is the degree to which, like, when we go into a situation, I'm consciously thinking about how I'm presenting. We do this all the time. Obviously, if you're going to go on a job interview, you're going to dress up. And that's part of self-presentation. It's an active engagement in how you're presenting yourself. Smiling when you're meeting people. There's some sex differences on that too. Women are more likely to smile in self-presentation than men are. So self-presentation has a lot of interesting things related to it. It's related to social status, the extent to which we are viewed positively by others. So if you think about how have you manipulated your self-presentation in the past, we have some strategic ways of doing that. Here are some of the strategies that are talked about. Self-promotion is, you would do this in a job interview. You would actively try to upgrade like your positive qualities. I'm efficient, I'm punctual, I'm honest, I'm a hard worker, I'm a good team player. If I'm saying all these things, and I'm self-promoting. Men do this more than women. You're talking about your strengths and your accomplishments, and when they ask you your weaknesses, like, sometimes I work too hard. That's a common thing related to self-promotion. There's a few others here that I'm not going to talk about all these. Being more modest tends to de-emphasize one's strengths, but it does increase the degree to which other people like us, because when we're bragging all the time, that tends to annoy people. Intimidation is an obvious self-presentation strategy. And typically it seems like people who use this approach often feel insecure themselves. But the one I want to focus on this slide is ingratiation. That is flattering others, trying to make others, but that's also being known as being a suck up. Results show, though, in managers getting greater salary increases and promotions every 5 years are the ones who use ingratiation as a technique in self-presentation. As you can tell, some of the things when it comes to like self-promotion, you can start to get into different personality styles. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of someone who's narcissistic. Someone who's narcissistic is self-centered. They can't empathize with others. They're all about themselves. Everything relates to them. They do have high self-esteem, but they overestimate themselves. They interrupt other people. They react negatively when criticized. That's you look at the research on people who are high on narcissism. They're basically in love with themselves. They also tend to cheat more often in their own romantic relationships. So they think like, hey, I can do no wrong. I mean, and even if I do, well, I deserve good things. And so it's really difficult to empathize with someone they're in a relationship with in case they cheat in that relationship. One thing we see in relation to self-research is that when you get two people interacting frequently, if someone's like moving their hands like this, we tend to unconsciously imitate or mimic what another person's doing to some degree. It's not like an overt, you did this, now I do that. It's not Simon Says. But the degree to which a person holds themselves openly, the degree to which they smile, those things we tend to mimic. If you look at the research described in your book in this, one of the things you'll find is that the people who are high on self-monitoring are going to be much more likely to mimic their conversation partners and however they're talking. But they'll do that much more so if the person they're interacting with has a power position or a leadership position over them. Those people are way more likely to mimic the nonverbals of someone they're interacting with. Please read that research. This is a graph from that study in your book. Another area where we get self-esteem and just our sense of self is the degree to which we associate with groups. And I mean, it's important for us to be connected with groups. I mean, that's actually, it's a huge thing for us. And to feel like that we identify, that we're not alone. And we get a lot of positive feelings and emotions associated with identifying with a particular group of people. So you can think about that in terms of church membership, political party affiliation, racial groups, all sorts of groups that we can identify. We can say even Lincoln team, like I'm a member of this team. Those all bring with them enhanced self-esteem. We do some social comparison too in terms of our self-identity too. When it comes to social comparison, if we're feeling like maybe a bit nervous or worried about how we're self-presenting, oftentimes we'll look at other people and we'll look for people who are not appearing to perform to the level we are. That's called a downward social comparison. We look at, if we even go into a job interview and there's other people in the waiting room waiting to be interviewed for the same job, we'll start picking apart those people typically who have not worked on their appearance as much, and just start coming up with more criticism that way, trying to do a downward social comparison. I think my grandpa said it best. It's, he didn't use the phrase downward social comparison, but it's like, well, at least you're better off than all those people in the cemetery. And it's like, yeah, that's a downward social comparison. When you compare yourself to dead people, well, then you're better off than they are today. One of the last terms in this chapter that we'll be talking about is basking in the reflected glory of our group. If our group does well, if our team wins, even if our best friend does something really good, we love being close to that warm spotlight. So that's basking in the reflected glory, all this kind of reflected light on us. As long as this is whatever their success is not dramatically in conflict with what we value our own strength as and someone else is doing better. But if we can gain status by being close to someone who does well, so that's people also who really look to being associated with like kind of name droppers, famous people and things like that. They get to bask in the reflected glory. That was a lot of terms related to the self in 20 minutes time. So I hope you read the book and you've come to class to talk about these terms in, again, a more cohesive way where you'll see how they interrelate a little bit more.